Alhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. I just want to thank everyone for coming out today to join us for this very special event on the topic of Islamic education. Now, it's very clear, I think, to everyone the importance of the topic of Islamic education, and especially in light of recent events in the last few years in the region, this topic has become quite a central focal point of debate and discussion. And so here tonight, what we really wanted to do was offer a platform for experts who from this field to talk about their experiences with regards to Islamic education, to offer their insights, and to maybe open up the horizons for where we think the gaps are and where we think we can go forward with this topic. We have with us today a very distinguished panel. We have Dr. Maryam Al-Hashmi. She's an Emirati specialist in education, and she is currently the Director of Curriculum at the Emirates National Schools. And Dr. Maryam is a practitioner in this field, and she's done a lot of work on the issue of Islamic education and many other topics. She's presented in many national, local and regional international conferences. Dr. Mujaddid Zaman is a research fellow and lecturer at the University of Tübingen in Germany, and he currently teaches a very innovative class in Germany. He's teaching Islamic pedagogy to the future generation of Islamic teachers, Islamic studies teachers, in Germany. And he has a PhD from the University of Cambridge in the field of the philosophy of education. And lastly, we have Dr. Nadeem Memon, who is the Director of Education at Abu Dhabi University Knowledge Group. And Dr. Nadeem develops educational solutions to improve the quality of teaching and learning in Gulf regional schools. And this includes Arabic and Islamic studies. Previously, he worked with the Abu Dhabi Educational Council on educational projects for local schools. And Dr. Nadeem also spearheaded and pioneered a online teacher certificate program called the Islamic Teacher Education Program, which sought to provide teachers of Islamic education with the skills and the understandings they need to be effective teachers in this field. And this is a course that's accredited by the University of Toronto. So we'll hear from each one of the panelists, and then we'll have a short panel discussion with them, and then we'll open up the floor for any questions and answers. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد النبي المعلم الأول وعلى آله وصحبه. بداية أشكر مؤسسة طابة على استضافتهم وعلى طرحهم لهذا الموضوع وتنظيم هذه الحلقة النقاشية. إن شاء الله اليوم سأستعرض معكم بعض الأفكار المرتبطة بمادة التربية الإسلامية في سياقات الماضي والحاضر والمستقبل، لاستخلاص النقاط المرتبطة بكل من الثغرات والفرص أيضا. اهتمامي بهذا الجانب جاء نابعا من الحاجة الماسة في الميدان، الحاجة إلى جهود جادة للرفع من المخرجات ومن النتائج التي تثمرها دراسة مادة التربية الإسلامية. فنجد أنه بينما يسهل توفير المصادر لمادة العلوم مثلا، أو تتيسر إقامة برامج التدريب لمعلمي الرياضيات، نجد نواجه ندرة وصعوبة في توفير الدعم لجانب تعلم وتعليم مادة التربية الإسلامية. بداية عندما نتحدث عن الماضي نجد أن كلمة الماضي بحاجة إلى توصيف لما يحيط بها من لبس في سياق تدريس مادة التربية الإسلامية تحديدا. فقد نتحدث عن الماضي بالإشارة إلى القرنين الماضيين اللذين اتصفت نماذج التعليم فيهما بأنها على شاكلة النموذج الصناعي أو ما يشبه المصنع، استجابة للفكر السائد ولحاجة العصر حينذاك عالميا. ظهرت حينها فكرة تصنيف الطلبة بحسب العمر، يتم تدريسهم نفس المادة بهدف أن يحسنوا تفريغ ما حفظوه في ورقة امتحان تثبت تلقيهم للمعلومات بغض النظر عن جانب الفهم والتطبيق، ليعتمد انتقالهم إلى المرحلة التالية. وذلك النموذج التعليمي طبق على جميع المواد عند تأسس الأنظمة الحديثة في الدول العربية بما فيها مادة التربية الإسلامية. وهذه هي صورة الماضي الذي يرى الكثيرون بأنه سبب لضعف تدريس مادة التربية الإسلامية اليوم، وهو المشار إليه غالبا عندما توصف مادة التربية الإسلامية بأنها تقليدية. هذه الصورة تحجب صورة الماضي الذي قام من قبله من أنظمة التعليم، والذي بان نجاحه في صورة حضارة العلم التي امتد أثرها الإيجابي الكبير على الأفراد والمجتمعات ل10 قرون. من الثغرات الناتجة عن الانفصال عن هذا الماضي عند حديثنا عن التربية الإسلامية اليوم، سواء في برامج إعداد المعلم، في أدلة المعلم، في برامج التدريب المستمر، حتى في الأدبيات والأبحاث الحديثة، نجد أن معلم التربية الإسلامية يفتقر إلى الانسجام والموائمة بين أصول المادة، مادة التربية الإسلامية وعلوم الشريعة، وبين الوسائل والأساليب، مما ينتج عنه التباسات وتناقضات كثيرة يصعب عليه حلها. فهو يرى أنه حتى يرتقي بتدريسه للمادة، حتى يحبها الطلبة، وحتى يستفيد الطلبة أكثر، فإن ما عليه فعله هو أن يفتش في المواقع عن الأدوات الممتعة، أن يتبنى أساليب التعلم التعاوني، التفكير الناقد، حل المشكلات، التحليل، غيرها من المهارات العامة، يقحمها في حصصه ناسبت أم لم تناسب، ليصبح معلما متميزا. وبهذا يندفع إلى الوسائل بانعزال عن الأهداف، مما يحدث أثرا عكسيا ويؤثر سلبا على جوانب الفكر والعلم والوعي. طبعا على الجانب الآخر توجد الفئة التي لا تقتنع أصلا، لأنها تعتبر هذه الأساليب أو الوسائل دخيلة غير متناسبة مع طبيعة المادة، وهذا المعلم سوف ينحصر في زاوية مقاومة التغيير، وسيعسر عليه الخروج منها لعدم توفر البديل أو البدائل. فنجد أن لدى المعلمين إشكالات في مادة التربية الإسلامية، منها يسمعون باستمرار عن انتقاد الحفظ والتلقين. كيف أفسر الحفظ المطلوب في مادة التربية الإسلامية؟ التفكير الناقد كيف يطبق بشكل صائب في مادة التربية الإسلامية؟ العمل التعاوني كيف أوفق بينه وبين أن يتلقى الطلبة محاضرات من المعلم وما إلى ذلك. في ضوء ما سبق تظهر لدينا أيضا تساؤلات ملحة. هل المطلوب مني كمعلم أن أقوم بأخذ المعلومات عن الدين مجردة وأن أصبها في قوالب المهارات العامة؟ هل أفتقر كمعلم تربية إسلامية إلى منهجية للتعلم والتعليم، كما أن مثلا للعلوم منهجية خاصة تجريبية مستقاة من علماء المادة ومن العلم نفسه؟ إذن توجد حاجة إلى استكشاف فلسفة التعليم الإسلامي واستنباط الحلول التي تقدمها تلك الفلسفة لتلبية احتياجات تدريس مادة التربية الإسلامية اليوم، بل التعليم ككل. سنستفيد من طرح الإمام الغزالي حول الموازنة بين الحفظ والفهم ومتى يطلب كل منهما، من طرح ابن مسكوي حول تدريس التربية الأخلاقية، من طرح ابن خلدون في مسألة أساليب التدريس واختلافها باختلاف السياقات، من طرح ابن سحنون حول واجبات ودور المعلم، ومن طرح القابسي حول تكوين العادات لدى المتعلم وغير ذلك. إن جسر الهوى بين الحديث وبين الإرث القديم يسهم في البناء على ما هو موجود أصلا، وفي التحدث إلى معلمي التربية الإسلامية من منطلق ما يقدرونه هم وما يفهمونه وما هو مرتبط بهم لصياغة نموذج تعليمي أصيل. هذا كان الجزء الأول المرتبط بالماضي. عندما نتحدث عن الحاضر، بحمد الله واقع تدريس التربية الإسلامية في دولة الإمارات اليوم نستطيع الحديث عن الكثير من النجاحات. نشرت وثيقة التربية الإسلامية المحدثة الأولى على اليمين، أحدثت نقلة نوعية في صياغة المادة من حيث المخرجات، مخرجات التعليم وما هو مطلوب في تدريس المادة عام 2011، ونشر إطار المعايير عام 2014 من قبل وزارة التربية والتعليم، وهو ما يعتمد في جميع المدارس الحكومية والخاصة. وهذه الوثيقة تميزت بعدد من الجوانب التي تفردت بها، منها أن جميع مكونات المنهج ربطت بمنظومة القيم، فهو في الأساس منهج مبني على القيم لبناء شخصية واعية متمسكة بدينها بانية لوطنها. نرى أيضا أن المنهج متوائم مع الرؤى الوطنية، وهذا مهم ومطلوب، وكانت توجد يعني ثغرات في هذا الجانب. هو مبني على المعايير المتسقة عموديا وأفقيا بشكل جيد. المنهج أيضا قائم على رؤية وسطية متوازنة، ويهدف إلى تكوين عقلية مرنة تنبذ التطرف وتدرك أهمية الاختلاف والتنوع، وهذا تمت مراعاته في جميع المراحل. كما أنه أيضا من الجوانب يعني يتميز فيها المنهج هو أنه مرتبط بالواقع وباحتياجات الطالب اليوم، مرتبط بشكل كبير بالحياة العصرية. هذه كانت جوانب القوة. في نفس الوقت نجد أن هناك عددا من التحديات، وهي تمثل فرصا للتحسين وللعمل، منها الافتقار إلى برامج إعداد المعلمين الجيدة. بالمثل نحتاج برامج التدريب أو التطوير المهني المستمر للمعلمين الذين هم في الميدان حاليا. وفي هذا الجانب أنوه إلى أن الحاجة، عندما أتحدث عن التدريب، الحاجة إلى تطوير الجانب المعرفي لا تقل أهمية عن الحاجة إلى تطوير جانب المهارات، وهذا ربما يعني الكثير يغفلون عنه. توجد حاجة إلى مواد ومصادر لدعم تدريس مادة التربية الإسلامية، وحاجة إلى الاستمرار في تطوير الكتب الدراسية. من التحديات أيضا التي كثيرا ما تتكرر بشكل يعني تطرح في الإعلام أو في المواد في الأبحاث المنشورة، جانب أساليب التعليم. فأقتبس لكم من بحث نشر لدكتور عبد حمدان الزبون عام 2014 عن دولة الإمارات. هنا التعليم الثانوي يقول أن حصة التربية الإسلامية يغلب عليها الجفاف وتسودها أنماط التلقين وحشو أدمغة المتعلمين بالحقائق أحيانا، بما يؤثر على التوجهات وعلى الآداب المكتسبة. تؤيد هذه الملاحظة التقييمات سواء من مجلس أبو ظبي للتعليم أو من هيئة المعرفة بدبي. كثير من المدارس التي تقيم بشكل مرتفع في مجالات تأتي مادة التربية الإسلامية بالذات وينخفض فيها التقييم. من التحديات أيضا أن الدراسات الميدانية أو بشكل عام دراسات عن مادة التربية الإسلامية نادرة، وإذا أتينا إلى الدراسات التي نشرت نجد أنها ليست مركزة على الجوانب ذات الأولوية والتي نحن بحاجة إليها. أضيف على ما ذكرت تحد آخر لا يقل أهمية عما سبق، وهو أن الإسهامات من قبل تخصص التربية الإسلامية في الحوار العالمي حول تحسين التعليم وتطويره أو حول مواجهة تحديات الواقع بحلول وأطروحات أصيلة تكاد لا تذكر. وأقتبس هنا من بحث لسيباستيان غونتر مدير معهد الدراسات العربية والإسلامية بجامعة غوتنغن، يقول في معرض حديثه عن التعليم بشكل عام أن الحلول لمشاكل عديدة نواجهها اليوم بالإمكان أن نجدها في خزائن العلوم التاريخية، وأن الدراسات في مجال التعليم الإسلامي يجب أن توفر مساهمات أصيلة لتطوير الفكر التعليمي الآن كما فعلت في قرون ماضية. فالعلماء المسلمون في العصر الذهبي كانوا على درجة عالية من الابتكار في مجال تطوير نظريات بيداغوجية أصيلة طبقت فيما بعد في سياقات متنوعة، وهو عزا قابليتهم هذه على الابتكار إلى تقديرهم للمنطق العقلي واستجاباتهم العلمية للاحتياجات الفردية والمجتمعية وللتعددية. آخر جزء من الكلمة هو ذلك المتعلق بالمستقبل. تحدثنا عن الماضي وعن الحاضر، سأتطرق إلى الحديث عن المستقبل بالانطلاق من بوتقة الماضي مسترشدة باحتياجات الحاضر. بناء على دراسة شاملة لنتاج التراث الإسلامي في مجال التعليم، يتبين أن للتعليم نموذجا معرفيا خاصا به، ويستمد هذا النموذج المعرفي مقوماته من ممارسات التعليم الواردة عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، ومما سجل وحفظ في كتب الفكر التربوي الإسلامي. ومن المفاهيم الخمسة الأساسية التي غالبا ما يشار إليها عند الحديث عن التعليم الإسلامي ككل، سأتحدث عن بعض التطبيقات والآفاق المستقبلية التي يرشدنا إليها كل مفهوم باختصار. فإذا أتينا إلى المفهوم الأول، العلم، نجد أنه وفق فلسفة التعليم في الإسلام هو متكامل وكلي. دراسة هذا الجانب ستفيدنا في تطبيق التكامل على مستوى المنهاج وأساليب التدريس، من حيث حسن نسج أفرع مادة التربية الإسلامية بناء على المفاهيم الرئيسية التي تمثل مقاصد تدريس المادة. وهذا توجه اليوم النظر إلى التكامل في بناء المناهج، وهو توجه أيضا يظهر في كتب التربية الإسلامية وفي فلسفة التعليم الإسلامي الكثير مما يمكن أن يفيدنا في هذا الجانب. المفهوم الثاني مفهوم المتعلم. نجد أن النظرة إلى المتعلم دائما لم تكن مقتصرة قط على الجانب العقلي، بل جاءت دائما شاملة للجوانب الفكرية والروحانية والعاطفية والجسمية أيضا، كما يظهر في كتابات كبار العلماء المسلمين. من هنا يتبين لنا ألا مسوغ لتدريس حصة مبنية على تفريغ معلومات بحتة في صفحات كتاب أو محاولة إدخالها في دماغ طالب لم يؤهل لها أو لا يفهمها. من المفهوم الثالث التعليم، إحدى الأوجه الأساسية أن التعليم جاء دائما مرتبطا بالتطبيق، وهذا يدعونا للتساؤل عن مقدار ارتباط الجانب النظري في تعلم وتعليم مادة التربية الإسلامية اليوم بالجانب العملي. ما مدى اقتران العلم بالعمل؟ كيف يتحقق ذلك في الحصص؟ هل توجد منهجية لملاحظة الأثر السلوكي الناتج عن اكتساب المعلومات؟ لدينا أطروحات قيمة في مجال ربط الجانب النظري بالعملي، ويتبين لنا هنا أن تكديس المعلومات دون ما اعتناء بالجانب التطبيقي لا ينسجم مع المقاصد ولا الوسائل الموروثة. المفهوم الرابع وهو مفهوم التأديب، يؤصل لهدف أساسي من أهداف تدريس مادة التربية الإسلامية، وهو بناء الأخلاق. وعندما نرى جهود الفكر التربوي الإسلامي في تأصيل العلوم التي تعنى بترسيخ القيم السلوكية، نتساءل: هل تمثل مؤشرات تطبيق الأخلاق معايير تقييم لنجاح تدريس التربية الإسلامية اليوم؟ الممارسات الأخلاقية كانت متضمنة في التوقعات وفي الممارسات لكل عامل من عوامل العملية التعليمية، ولم يكن النقل المجرد للحقائق والمعلومات دون مصاحبة جوانب بناء الأخلاق وغرس القيم مقبولا أبدا. آخر تلك المفاهيم التربية، من المشاكل أو القضايا التي تعاني منها المدارس بشكل عام اليوم وفي كثير من الحصص، يعامل الطلبة وكأنهم مجرد أرقام. ونرى أن فلسفة التعليم الإسلامي تقوم على العلاقة الشخصية بين المربي وبين الطالب، ونرى ذلك ممتدا ومنعكسا على هيئات وأساليب كثيرة، منها مثلا الحلقة. البحث في هذا الجانب سيفتح لنا آفاقا في تفريد التعليم بما يتفق مع الاستعداد الفطري والخصائص العمرية للمتعلم وحاجاته وميوله. فكم سيكون ملهما للمعلم أن يتعرف على تفاصيل ذلك من سيرة الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم ومن كتب العلماء ومن تاريخ الحضارة الإسلامية، وأن نمده في نفس الوقت بأدوات التطبيق العملي التي تتناسب مع وضع التعليم في مدارسنا اليوم وبما سيضيف لها الكثير. مع ما سبق، توجد الحاجة إلى الاستفادة مما تقدمه تطبيقات التكنولوجيا من تضخيم لأثر التعليم، الاستفادة من طرح الأنظمة الحديثة، لكن بما يجمع الفهم العميق لتلك الأدوات لتطبق بالطريقة الصحيحة من جانب، ومن جانب آخر الوعي بفلسفة التربية الإسلامية لتحقيق أهداف التربية، تدريس المادة للطالب بحيث تخضع الأداة للغاية وليس العكس. ختاما، من ناحية نظرية توجد حاجة إلى تجديد الفكر وتجديد المنهج وفق أصول صحيحة، ومن ناحية عملية لا يمكن لأي نظام تعليمي أن يرتقي فوق مستوى المعلمين فيه، فدعم المعلم هو الأولوية من أجل الرفع من مستوى تعلم وتعليم المادة. أشكر لكم حسن استماعكم، والشكر أكرر الشكر لمؤسسة طابة، وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وخير وشر مشيئة الله. صلي وسلم على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وآله. Well, there's very little to be said after that, I think. Doctor has just kind of done a wonderful exposition of all of the kind of revolving and complex issues related to theoretical matters of Islamic education. In my kind of demure manner, I will try to offer something as an addition to what was said initially in regards to the issues related to contemporary problems, theoretical problems in Islamic education, and how they converse with a kind of an indigenous and authentic proposition of learning in Islamic civilization. So the National Union of Teachers has just wrapped up their annual conference in Cardiff, Wales this year. Amongst the items on the agenda were the expected disquietude over matters relating to labour rights, representation and pay. However, amidst these discussions, the discernible discontent surrounding the nature of education came to be heard most acutely. Chief amongst the complaints were the demoralizing effects of the over-testing and under-educating of students at both primary and secondary levels in England. This has subsequently led to a straining of the system by fatiguing its main human resource, i.e. the teachers themselves. This anomaly is surprising at the National Union of Teachers, though not unexpected when read in the context of growing critiques sounded by the academic literature on education. Amongst the more boisterous voices of critique comes from sociologists of education, in particular the neo-institutionalist school of thought and their doyen, Professor David Baker, are of particular interest. Baker's new work, entitled The Schooled Society, claims that the 21st century is being marked by an unprecedented internationalization of the education industry. Within it, people have begun, he claims, to increasingly mark their human value by the grades they receive at school or measure their success and failure in life as correlated to achievements in institutionalized education. This may not be such a bad thing if education were a gentrifying social force. However, as the rising listlessness of the teachers' conference shows, a growing sentiment reveals that the exercise of education often holds little more than testing skills that students should ascertain. In this miasma, there is a growing concern about what the principles of education ought to be in the West. This search in recent years has increasingly become somewhat of a desperate scavenge in a world in which the old colonial narrative of education is lost. The religious imperative in the West of education is redundant, Enlightenment values of equality are listlessly touted by politicians, and the liberal ideal of education is considered an indulgence. These developments in the field of educational studies are prescient, not only because of what they reveal about global developments in education, but also, and importantly for our discussion here tonight, how they help any concept of Islamic education in its primary, secondary context, respectively, into a indispensable dialogue with the broader context of educational discourses. Therefore, in my brief presentation this evening, I would like to open a discussion, perhaps a thought experiment. The question of this experiment is simply to consider philosophical problems facing modern education and ask what, if anything, does a historically indigenous conception of Islamic education have to teach us today? To help answer this, I shall firstly identify first principles and provide a brief historical perspective of education in Islamic civilization. Secondly, I wish to consider contemporary trends in pedagogical and empirical field research in educational thought, which is leading, I argue, towards what may be called a pedagogical traditionalism, i.e. a reappraisal of classical ideas and methods of learning which have potentially dramatic consequences for schooling. And finally, I will consider what classical ideas of Islamic education and the turn towards pedagogical traditionalism may mean for primary school education, or the teaching of Islam in primary school. Firstly, to begin with history and historical thinking about Muslims on education. Here the medievals realized, perhaps with greater clarity than we have today, that a small mistake in the beginning leads to a greater one in the end, as St. Thomas Aquinas reminds us. So too with education, and the importance of seeing it as a form of growth and outpouring. To this end, medieval Islamic thought suggests an early appreciation, as well as a need to understand children not merely as small adults or non-persons, but as sui generis, i.e. a category of their own. Comparisons with medieval Christian conceptions of the young, for example, are conflated somewhat by the latter's theological tensions laying in original sin and divine munificence. However, whilst the draw of the Spirit in baptism suggests a way of initiation to spiritual maturity, it also emphasizes the distance in theological thinking between it and traditional Islamic thought. The advice of the Holy Prophet and his own necessitates, his sunnah necessitates honoring child rearing and the education of the young. This imitatio Muhammadi, fidelity to the Prophet's manner of being, can be drawn out in a number of ways through the medieval texts, which seek in their varying ways to define the task of education. Unfortunately, we do not have time to enumerate all of this rich medieval literature, but here are a few examples which will hopefully suffice. Firstly, there is the Neo-Pythagorean philosopher Bryson, whose work translated into Arabic formed an arc around which medieval discussions of Islamic education convened. An Aristotelian-inspired treatise dealing with education as balancing the child's natural propensities for good and evil serves as an important basis for medieval discussions on education. There is then the 9th century Ben Letton Al-Jahith, whose book Advice to Teachers, written in the second person singular form, offers indispensable counsel for teachers in their pursuit for educating the young, which, in my estimation, would hold great value for 21st century discussions on pedagogy. There is also the 10th century Ibn Jazar, who wrote the Kitab al-Siyasa al-Ibsiyan, which is encyclopedic in its range, and it covers everything from pediatrics to pedagogy, is a missed opportunity, I think, for modern educationalists. His exposition of education begins with a rather poetic description of a child as a branch which has been cut from a tree, which, while still in its mother's womb, the child remains protected and is cut upon birth, requiring planting in this world. There is also the 12th century Doyen Imam al-Ghazali, who treats the subject rather briefly in his Ahya, but speaks about the capacity of the child in creating balance between the different propensities which subsist within the individual. Even though his advice may sound hard on the ears of a modern reader, especially his instructions for a child's choice of apparel and food, there is a deep appreciation of the child's inherent brilliance, its eudaimonia in Greek. There is also Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya's 14th century text, Tafahat al-Mawdud, covering the period from a child's infancy to its medical, spiritual, vocational sensibilities and essential maturity. For more on this subject, if anybody's interested, there is a fastidiously compiled biography by Qasas Awad entitled Childhood and Children in Ancient Contemporary Arabic Sources. From such literature, we may discern, I believe, 5 motivating principles of Islamic education which may help us reorientate from kind of simplistic, dualistic notions of what Islamic education is, and to have a dialogue with contemporary issues in educational studies. The first, and probably the most indispensable, because of its preeminence, Islamic education cannot be dissimulated from the demands of the Holy Prophet's Sunnah on his community. One may even extend this point to presume that all Islamic civilization can be seen as little more than the historical exercise of ornamenting everyday life through his noble example. Secondly, there are presuppositions about children and assumptions about their personhood, i.e., about body and soul, which are inherently positive and not mired by theological connotations. This is a very important point to think about. Thirdly, early education can be viewed as a form of mizan, or balance building, in medieval Islamic thought. Pedagogy sways towards balance because of an acute awareness of an inherent centripetal force laying within the self, which requires balance, discipline, and cultivation. This has traditionally been achieved by the triad of ta'lim, ta'dib, and tarbiyah, all superintended by the divine and important act of adab. The concept of mizan can be exemplified in the life of Imam Ghazali, for example, whose pedagogic training was a subtle melding of the inward and the outward sciences. So we have an image, for example, from his biography of the young Ghazali, who would dedicate himself during the mornings in the logic chopping, rigorous, formal philosophical theology under the tutelage of Imam al-Haramain, Imam al-Juwayni, and in the afternoon would ride his mule into the outskirts of Nishapur and sit in the rose garden of Abu Ali al-Farmadi, the mystic and scholar who would, in the high poetics of Persian allegory and metaphor, infer another way of speaking about the divine through the symbols of virgin nature and love. The fourth principle of Islamic, medieval principle of Islamic education, is a continuation of tradition serving to act as the Weltanschauung, or the world view of Islam. This can be evidenced by the remarkable level of historical consistency existing in the Maktab education across over a millennia, and whose importance has yet to be fully appreciated or accounted for by modern academic scholarship. Finally, the fifth point is Islamic education perceives itself as an open-ended process which cannot be prescribed by indicators and measures for a child's growth and ultimate happiness. The overly results and measurement-based driven education of today is therefore an historical anomaly for a religious education. And this is a very important point, I think. Islam's attitudes to education, civilizationally speaking, have never been algorithmic, but rather alchemical. In that, in other words, it realizes the processes leading to the self-realization of individuals through education are indeterminate and individuated, and thus cannot be fixed by follies of standardized testing and measurement. Understanding these elements of Islamic education serves to help ensure modern discussions about Islamic education continue not to be segregated from contemporary discourses in the West. My own and humble contention would be that without firstly an admission and appreciation of such defining principles, proceeding to modern discussions about eradicating religious extremism in youth is a big folly. Having therefore now discerned potential principles of Islamic education, a broad understanding of what it is, we may now keep an eye on developments in the contemporary field of education pedagogic thinking, to discern where a discussion with Islamic primary education may take place. Such developments are important as they offer unexpected points of communication for the teaching of Islam. It is in this sense, one may argue, that a new leaf in educational thinking is currently being turned, and one which allows new ground for religious education to be tread. We may go as far as to say that after almost a century of modernist and postmodern experiments have led to what I would call a pedagogic traditionalism to emerge. By this I mean that there are changing attitudes in the running orthodoxies within pedagogical thinking in the West. Over the past 100 years, and at least since the popularization of the American philosopher John Dewey's work, the importance of education as doing, or as praxis, has triumphed and arguably serves as the mantra for modern pedagogic discourses. This orthodoxy has increasingly been challenged with a growing realization that formal teaching, memorization, learning facts, and expertise count more than transferable skills and the teaching of competencies. For prominent critiques of this idea of therapeutic education, I would highly recommend Daisy Christodoulou's excellent book, The 7 Myths of Education, as well as the recent work called The Death of Expertise by Professor Tom Nichols. There is also a turn in pedagogical sciences that we are seeing and witnessing, backed by a growing body of empirical research, which also reflects this pedagogical traditionalism. For example, a recent study from the researchers at the University of Bournemouth found that student comprehension increases when they're allowed to take their shoes off before entering the classroom. Sitting on the floor has apparently shown to have benefits on memory as well as classroom behavior. Moreover, a recent study from Norway's Stavanger University found that students absorb more when reading from books than electronic tablets. Such examples account for only a fraction of this new empirical research, which reveals a move towards pedagogical traditionalism or an affirmation of pre-modern ideas about learning that have seemed hitherto outdated and redundant. This is especially important for any discussion of the teaching of Islam at the primary level, as it opens a mutual dialogue with its historical preoccupation with education. A prominent case that we could mention is that of Germany. Though a secular and non-majority Muslim country, presently 7 of Germany's 16 federal states offer Islamic education in their curriculums. As a pastoral state, this means that only in the teaching of religion it's pastoral, which means that only people of that religion can teach that religion. So if you're a Catholic, you're allowed to teach Catholic theology to high schoolers and so on. Here, curriculums of Islamic education have recently been motivated by political discussions of radicalization. However, the curriculums themselves have been set by scholars and teachers with a broad-based approach to teaching, which covers everything from Quranic studies, usul al-fiqh, history, aesthetics, and culture. This experiment is still in its infancy and much has yet to be seen. However, it does show a propitious step towards a new way of thinking about Islamic education in the state sector. So, in concluding my brief and muddled thoughts, this brief introductory remarks have shown the potential of Islamic education to converse with contemporary developments in the field of pedagogical studies as well as educational studies. It seems to be an open plane that has been created, and which is fortuitously created, I think, that allows and requires Muslim educationalists in Muslim-majority countries to reflect upon. To do this will require temerity, insight, and confidence in the rich intellectual heritage drawn from the Islamic past. It is a moment to seize, and not to do so would be a lost opportunity, I believe. As the Holy Prophet himself has said, knowledge from which no benefit is derived is like a treasure out of which nothing is spent in the cause of God. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening. It's always difficult going last, because when you go last you get peppered with the most questions when it comes to the Q&A. So maybe we can turn that around today. I'd like to thank طابة for the invitation and Abbas for the invitation. Inshallah, my thoughts will not be repetitive, but a way of melding and meshing and building on the previous two speakers. So I'll speak a little bit about the complexities of teaching Islam and build on a lot of what Dr. Maryam said with the local context. I've been working here for the past couple of years in the field of providing professional development, teacher training, both for Islamic studies and Arabic studies teachers. And at the same time, the work that Dr. Mujaddid Zaman has talked about, connecting the theoretical practice of thinking about Islamic pedagogy in relation to what it can mean for Islamic studies in Islamic schools. So I'd like to begin by sharing a little bit of a story. I'm from Canada, and when I was doing my doctoral research at the University of Toronto, this was around 2006, 2007, I was doing my work on Islamic schools in North America, the history and philosophy of how Islamic schools came about. Around 2006, this was post 9/11, there was a lot of instances of radicalism propping up across North America and across the globe. 2006, I happened to be at an Islamic school in Toronto to do research, and these reporters came in and started asking students questions about what's being taught in Islamic studies. So I asked the reporter what's the rationale for coming to this particular Islamic school, and they said, well, as you know, in the news, there were just 18 young Muslim men who were arrested in Toronto, what's known now as the Toronto 18. 18 young Muslim men were arrested for acts of gathering for the potential of extremist acts, terrorist acts. So I said to her, but those 18 students attend public schools in Toronto. And she said, I know, but I just want to know what's being taught in Islamic studies. And that was a key point for me to realize that a lot of times we begin to sensationalize the teaching of Islamic studies where we start looking for answers in the wrong places. And my question to her was, shouldn't we be going to the public schools where these students are and ask questions to the teachers about how this could have happened under the guise of being in a public school? Because I went to a public school. And I know that a lot of times what you need is an opportunity for teachers to engage with students better, to understand what could be happening at schools. But they went to an Islamic school. Now, why this is important is because last week, not sure if you're following the news in Australia, but there was a call for closing all Islamic schools in Australia. Ayan Hirsi Ali was to be visiting one of the critical, outspoken intellectuals, has said that Islamic schools in Australia should be shut down. And I thought to myself, well, why is this happening? And the reason that's happening is because if you're following the news, there was a story of a few Muslim male students in a public school, again, in Australia, that at their graduation ceremony refused to shake the hands of their female teachers when they were receiving their awards. And these stories got conflated between what's happening in Muslim students in public schools and what's happening in Islamic schools. Now, not to say that extremism doesn't happen or that there isn't an issue of radicalization, but to say that oftentimes in the media we conflate these types of stories. And for us as academics, as educators, being able to separate these two things and starting to ask ourselves what's really happening in one specific context as opposed to another context, these are very unique contexts. So, that said, teaching Islam, as we know, is a contested space. If you're in higher education, this has been going on for a long time. The question of whether a non-Muslim academic can accurately teach religious studies, whether a Muslim or a religious academic can teach their own religion and be objective, whether you have to be objective to teach religious studies, whether subjectivities are allowed, lots and lots of questions come up. And similarly, as Mujaddid mentioned, we're now having that conversation in the K-12 space as well about whether we can have somebody who is not a practicing believer of a particular religion teach about that religion, or vice versa, or practicing person teach about the religion. So there's a lot of debate happening around religious studies, and it's been going on for the past 2 or 3 decades, really since the 1980s, when Islamic studies started picking up in higher education. One of the big points of debate of why religious studies or Islamic studies or Islamic education is a concern is because of the term dogmatic. And this is not just for Islamic schools or Islamic education, but it's for the teaching of religion generally. Jewish schools, Catholic schools, Christian schools, and now Islamic schools or Islamic education have all been sort of, they've been leveled with the same argument of how can you teach in a school when there is no other option? You're teaching students as though this is the truth with capital T. And that issue of dogmatism has been one of the major sort of founding concerns of how we teach Islamic education. But at the same time, I think it's important to recognize, when you're looking at this from a philosophy of education, that all teaching can be dogmatic. Science can be dogmatic. Social studies can be dogmatic. The curriculum that we choose for English, as those of us that choose curriculum, that study curriculum, we know that just by virtue of the way you design your course outline, the types of books you choose, the types of books you promote, is in a way a form of dogmatism. If I'm promoting a certain type of literature, it's a form of promoting a particular type of truth. So we need to recognize that when we're talking about religious education, we're talking about a broader issue around philosophy of education, of how we consider what should be allowed to be taught and how we're making those decisions. Now, one of the other issues that I think is critical, and Mujaddid talked a lot about traditional, how did you term it, Islamic traditionalism or pedagogical traditionalism. I think you're very right that as much as there's this movement towards pedagogical traditionalism, at the same time there's another push from within schools at a practical level to adopt a lot of the practices that are happening in schools in general. So Mujaddid talked a lot about, for example, the overemphasis on testing, on measurement. And yet, what we see in a lot of schools, especially for Islamic schools, let's say in the West, but also in a lot of the teaching of Islamic studies here in the UAE and in the region, there's a lot of adopting of the common practices that are being used in conventional schooling. So we start to use those types of methodologies of over-testing Islamic studies at a real level, at a practical level in schools, which needs to be challenged. So I think recognizing that constructivism is one of the aspects of how that shapes how we're being taught in schools. And what I mean by that is, for those of us that are educators, we know that one of the common buzzwords in education is student-centered learning. Everyone talks about student-centered learning. Islamic studies should be student-centered. But at the root of student-centered learning is really the idea that students should be leading the learning in a way where they're asking the questions and they're also at times coming up with the answers. Now, it's a fine line when you get to Islamic studies or any form of religious studies, because what role does the teacher play in bringing in content versus what role does the student play in asking questions? And this is why, for example, when we talk about critical thinking in Islamic studies, it's a huge point of debate. When I've done training with Islamic studies teachers, a lot of teachers will say, that's something we can't touch in Islamic studies. Because, as Mujaddid talked about, when we're talking, and Dr. Maryam mentioned as well, when we're talking about the principles of Islamic pedagogy, that reemergence is needed in terms of talking about how we can be critical, how we can be constructive, and yet still maintain the essence of both teaching a religion from a religious perspective and allowing for discussion and debate. And I'll get into that, but learning, for me, learning is less about what you know today in schools than it is about what you do with it. And, sorry, this is, I wanted to bring up, oh, Learning is less about what you know. So curriculums, as much as we're talking about curriculums that are outcome based. We have a lot of curriculums that are focused on learning outcomes, specific aspects of knowledge that you need to understand. But at the same time, now the push for Islamic studies is to become something that is application based. So you see a lot of discussions around making Islamic studies real or relevant or based on competencies and skills. And that's part of the new age, you'd say, of Islamic education, where we're talking about integrated curriculum. How do we integrate Islam across the curriculum, which is something that's being discussed. The relevance of Islamic studies, or the relevance of aspects of what we're learning. And I'll quote a work that Dr. Amir wrote, Professor Amir wrote, I believe it's 2006, where you used a term, Dr. Amir, called the American Muslim pedagogy, and a call for a lot of what Dr. Maryam and Dr. Mujaddad just mentioned, which is this synthesis of taking both the principles of an Islamic pedagogy and at the same time using frameworks, ways of thinking that are current, contemporary, that we can borrow and synthesize within an Islamic education. So this new age of Islamic education is shifting what we're seeing in schools, and I'll share a few examples in my research. You often see the traditional Islamic sciences being taught in many schools. This is both here and abroad in the West. Your top left of teaching Islamic sciences is still being done in madrasas and maktabs, where you have a focus on memorization, a focus on the Islamic sciences proper. But then you have a push, and you see this in the UAE, which I'll speak about, a push towards character education. Character education, the whole emphasis of character education is to say, it's not just about learning Islam, but it's about being Muslim. So we often ask parents who come into schools and say, do you have a really good Islamic studies program at this school? And they say, yes, we do. Well, how do you measure that? And that's the overemphasis on measurement. Well, personally, it begs the question, what is our measurement of success? Is it a certain amount of memorization of the Quran, or is it the way that we behave? Is it in our interaction? Is it the way that we communicate, we interact with people? So the push for character education is now saying, how do we get religious studies to be more practical? You also have a push for community activism. A lot more schools are now talking about how do you take Islam out of the classroom? How do you take Islam and share it? How do you do community service, clean up the environment? Because that in the end is an activism of character education. So it's not just about the rote learning anymore, but a lot of schools are pushing towards a form of active community service. And then you've got the schools that focus on basic beliefs and practices, which is distinct from the Islamic sciences, because basic beliefs and practices is really making sure that students leave with some foundation. And that's really what you can do, for example, in the UAE education system. You're not teaching Islamic studies as a science. You're teaching basic beliefs and practices because it's one subject amongst a core set of subjects. So there's different conceptions that you see, and similarly, you see a changing landscape here in the UAE. And I'll share some examples. Sheikh Rashid bin Saeed Islamic Institute is an institute based out of Dubai that focuses on the Islamic sciences. So you still have a preservation of teaching the formal Islamic sciences, and yet you have a Ministry of Education that's promoting a curriculum, not to say that these are distinct, but I'm saying that this is focused on the Islamic sciences, and then this is focused, the Ministry of Education is trying to produce a curriculum for Islamic studies in K-12 schools that is, as Dr. Maryam mentioned, based on moderate values. Again, values, character education, and then you see that being represented in schools. So some of the schools that you see, now these schools I believe are, the Bukhatir schools are based out of Sharjah, but the International School of Creative Science, although they don't make it explicit, they speak a lot about incorporating Islamic values across the curriculum. The same idea of integration is now becoming part and parcel of many schools. And then you've got initiatives like ADEX initiative here at Abu Dhabi Education Council speaking about national identity. Again, these are more creative ways of bringing Islamic education into the fore, but in a way that's not as formal as it used to be. Because the idea of national identity, really national identity is two things. It's Islamic values and it's Arabic language. But we have an Islamic studies curriculum. So if you have an Islamic studies curriculum, what's the role of the national identity framework? Or what's the role of the new moral education framework? All of these are attempts at making Islam more lived, more active, more integrated across the curriculum, more values-based. So you see three major initiatives: the formal curriculum, but then you see these other initiatives that are really intended to make this something that's cross-curricular. Now, one of the things I'll mention is that I've also done a lot of work here in the UAE with school teachers that do not teach Islamic studies, non-Muslim teachers who don't teach Islamic studies, but they're teaching in schools where there's significant percentages of Muslim students in the school, 80, 90, 95% Muslim students in the school. So the school wants to have an emphasis where values are integrated, and values are something that becomes part and parcel of every teacher promoting. So you have that as one aspect of it, and the other aspect of it is you have schools that are, let's say, a British curriculum school or an Australian curriculum school or an American curriculum school, who have a very small percentage of Muslim students, but the ministry, ADAC, KHDA, all ministry sort of bodies, and at the same time, parents are concerned about their children going to, let's say, a British school in Abu Dhabi, but feeling like they're in a bubble, not really getting a sense of the culture, of the values of the land. So the ideas of the National My Identity Initiative and moral education are that way of making sure that if you live here, you leave with a sense of the values, the perspectives, the approaches that are part and parcel of the UAE. And most recently, which I found interesting, a school opened up in Dubai, actually last year, called Next Generation School, which is the first school in the UAE that's branded as, and I didn't write this myself, this branded as an American Islamic school, which for someone like me in my research was very interesting, because it shows that there is a larger percentage of Muslim parents who are here who are saying, we want to see not just the best of an American or a British school curriculum, but we want to see a really authentically integrated aspect of teaching Islam from all staff. Even if you're a non-Muslim staff member, we'd like to see the values represented in our school. So this kind of shows you, similar to the previous slide, I mean, I could have given names of other schools from the US, but those wouldn't resonate necessarily, but you get the idea that it's not a singular type of Islamic studies that we're talking about, or a singular type of Islamic education. There's many different types and approaches, and a lot of this has to do with trying to renew or revitalize the way that we think about teaching of Islamic education. So we're moving towards what's called an applied Islam approach. And that applied Islam approach is a lot of what we've been saying, which is we're shifting away from a content focus to a application or being focus. It's a failure to have a child who comes out after 12 years of being in a school where you studied Islamic studies and you're still lying or cheating or doing very basic sort of things that should have been ingrained in you to at least be conscious of that these are inappropriate acts. So that sort of applied Islam is becoming more and more critical. Now the challenge forward is, in my mind, there's three key areas in thinking about Islamic education: the why, the what, and the how. If you think of the why, it generally is speaking about vision. So why do we teach Islamic education or Islamic studies? Well, the vision of it is, as the ministry has given us, it's to promote moderate values of Islam. And they have a vision, and that's been adequately thought through. The what is your curriculum. So if you're thinking about three key areas of education, the why, what, and the how, you've got the vision in place, you're thinking about the curriculum, and in my mind, and this is more outside of the UAE, but I think in general, in the study of Islamic studies, or the teaching of Islamic studies, I feel we have overemphasized curriculum. And what I mean by that is, I feel like we spend a lot of time critiquing, thinking about, developing, redeveloping, revising curriculum. And to be honest, even if you're a Ministry of Education, to revise a curriculum takes 5 to 7 years. And we as teachers in the field don't have those 5 to 7 years to wait for another revision of a curriculum. So from my perspective and in my research, I found that we really need to emphasize what's underemphasized, which is the teaching. And Dr. Maryam mentioned this as well, that really the way forward, the thing that we can impact tomorrow as educators, as parents, as people who are just concerned about the field of Islamic education, is how are we teaching Islamic studies? Because if any of you have been in a classroom, you know that when you look at that lesson plan and you see those learning outcomes, each of us in this room could approach it very differently. Learning outcomes are learning outcomes. They're what you should be teaching. But how you teach it could be done in many different ways. So the conversation that I feel we should be having is how do we teach Islamic studies in a way that makes it more relevant, more engaging for students? Because I think that's the issue that we have, is we have students coming home and saying, my math class was amazing, my science class was even better, but I really don't feel like going to Islamic studies. And that's not something parents want to hear. So that to me is where we should be putting our focus, and we should be forging what Dr. Mujaddid said, a renewed Islamic pedagogy, and which Dr. Amir said many years ago, which really was an impetus for me in my own research. Now, I'd like to get to my closure, but for those of you that follow the UAE education system, you know that schools in Dubai and Abu Dhabi are inspected, either by ADEC or by KHDA, which I think has had a major impact on the improvement of private schools and public schools here. But it's interesting to note that not one school, there's many schools that have gotten outstanding in the ratings. There's a number of there's 6 different ratings. So outstanding, very good, good, acceptable, weak, and very weak, something like that. Not one school has gotten outstanding in Islamic studies. To me, that is a wake-up call for us. That you even have outstanding schools. You have outstanding schools, but they've been able to get outstanding ratings while only being adequately good at Islamic studies and Arabic. Now, if that's our national identity, both for us who are living here and for locals, if this is our national identity, then our real concern is the quality of teaching and learning in Islamic studies. At the same time, I should recognize, because I've done a lot of training for Islamic studies teachers, and I don't want this to come across as a critique of teaching Islamic studies against the teachers. Teachers, I feel, have been very, very well intentioned, all of the teachers I've met, and very passionate about wanting to learn. But it's something that Dr. Maryam mentioned earlier, that it's the opportunities are not there. I've been to a lot of schools where teachers will bring in people for professional development, and they'll do the training generally for everyone. Well, first of all, not all Islamic studies teachers are that fluent in English. And if they are fluent in English, I think what we need professional development geared specifically about Islamic studies. How do you do a workshop on STEM or differentiation or these large, big ideas in education without really doing workshops on Islamic studies proper, specifically, or a teaching of Arabic language? So they're arguably the most scrutinized teachers, and I really don't feel they deserve it. I think they're the most scrutinized and the least supported. And I really say that with after 4 years of living here and doing workshops just for Islamic studies teachers, they are the most scrutinized and yet the least supported. Because if you think about it, imagine yourself being an Islamic studies teacher. I'm not sure how many of you might be, but imagine yourself being an Islamic studies teacher. The rest of your school is getting outstanding, and you're the one group of teachers that are bringing your school down. That's unfair. And it's unfair to not give the support or to give the opportunity for growth. So I think the way forward is, like I said earlier, but it's to think beyond curriculum and to support teacher development. I really feel that if there's something that we as a group of educators who are concerned, who want to debate and discuss education, if there's one thing that we can change tomorrow, it's the way that we support teacher development, as opposed to trying to debate and argue aspects of curriculum which are valid, very valid, but we can't change tomorrow. So thank you very much. There's a few further readings here that might be useful, and I'll close there. Okay.
Thank you, Nadeem, Mujaddid, and Mariam. I liked how you all really tackled the topics from very different perspectives, and I think that was the purpose of us meeting today, was to hear the local, the practical, and then the theoretical. In the interest of time, I'm not going to ask you too many questions, but there are just 3 questions, and I'd like to just direct them to each one of you. So, Dr. Mariam, you spoke in detail about the UAE context, and you mentioned the state of Islamic studies here in the UAE. But I think what would be interesting as well is that beyond the UAE, if we just think about this region only, you know, there's about 23 other countries where Islamic studies is being taught, and where students are receiving Islamic studies at least, you know, twice a week, right? And sometimes maybe 5 days a week. In your experience and your research and your studies, how would you describe the status of Islamic education in the UAE compared to other countries in the GCC and beyond?
بالنظر إلى واقع تدريس التربية الإسلامية في دولة الإمارات، بما يعني يتفرع من واقع التعليم في دولة الإمارات بشكل عام، نجد أن التعليم في دولة الإمارات متقدم مقارنة بالدول العربية الأخرى وبدول المنطقة. هذا بدوره انعكس على مادة التربية الإسلامية أيضا، فنجد أنها تجاوزت الكثير من التحديات التي يعاني منها تدريس المادة في دول أخرى. يعني إذا سألنا أي معلم في الدولة سيخبرنا بأن المادة أصبحت قريبة إلى نفوس الطلبة، أصبحت لديهم توجهات إيجابية نحو تعلم مادة التربية الإسلامية إلى حد كبير. المادة مرتبطة بالحياة، فهذه كلها طبعا لا توجد لدينا مشكلات متعلقة بمشكلات فكرية متعلقة بمثلا عدم تنمية التسامح أو ما إلى ذلك أو الانغلاق. هذا كله ليس موجود في مادة التربية الإسلامية في الدولة. إذا نظرنا أبعد من ذلك، ما الذي يمكن أن نستفيده من تجارب أخرى على مستوى العالم؟ نجد أن من 11 سبتمبر التزايد في الطلب أو الحاجة في مجال التعليم الإسلامي أدى إلى حركة كبيرة في البحث وفي النشر وفي العمل أيضا في مجال المدارس الإسلامية. إذا تحدثنا عن الغرب، فكان هناك نتاج كبير من الممكن أن نستفيد منه، وهو متعلق بجانبين. الجانب الأول هو جانب فلسفة التعليم الإسلامي وكيفية استنباط القواعد منه بما يمكن أن تفعل في الجانب العملي، والجانب الآخر هو تناول النظريات الحديثة، لأننا هنا في كثير من الأحيان تسقط بشكل سطحي أو غير مدروس بعمق. التعليم الإسلامي في دول الشرق من الجوانب القوية التي يمكن أن نستفيد منها جانب الأخلاق أو أساس التأديب. والتأديب كمفهوم يجب النظر إليه بشكل مختلف عما المفهوم السائد. عندما نسمع كلمة تأديب نربطها بالانضباط أو نربطها بأساليب عقاب مثلا. هو مفهوم أوسع بكثير من ذلك، حتى أنها كلمة التأديب كانت تستخدم من قبل العلماء المسلمين سابقا كمرادف حتى للتعليم، والمعلم هو المؤدب. من أمثلة الأعمال التي قامت في دولة كماليزيا إنتاجات سيد نقيب العطاس منذ السبعينات، وامتداد عمله أو أعمال كثيرة قامت بعد ذلك حتى الآن في ماليزيا، في إندونيسيا، وفي تايلاند. أيضا على المستوى العملي، أتحدث هنا عن مستوى التطبيقات والمدارس والاستنباطات من الفلسفة.
Nadine, do you want to add anything on that? Yeah. Mujaddid, so I thought your presentation was, I think, very interesting for many people, because it seemed that you were calling for a return or restoration of classical principles and ideas around teaching and classical models, essentially. Now, at the same time, there are people who think that's the actual problem, that a return back is the problem, and in fact we need to be looking forward. So what is it that you see in the classical model? And then you mentioned obviously references where these classical models are being revived or restored. What is it that you're seeing that is relevant to Islamic studies education today, that people who are diagnosing the problem as being, classical issues aren't seeing? What?
That's a very good question. It's a very good question. I think part of it is the approach that we have to history itself. I think part of it is this kind of historicism about, well, what was in the past and what is in the future and what are we going to do about it, and education kind of straddles that kind of nebulous place in the middle. I think instead of thinking about it in those terms, in terms of that kind of arrow of time, is to think about patterns that work. I think that's probably a bit more kind of fortuitous in relation to the kind of research which is being produced presently. And if we kind of shift the discourse, because language, meaning, and the way we think about the world are all related. Wittgenstein, the German Austrian philosopher, said that language is not just the means of creating meaning. Language is also the driver of meaning. So when we think and use terms such as, traditionalism and classical madrasas and all that, it conjures up certain things in the common consciousness which often perturb. But I think if you think about on a different level of engagement with these principles, so for example, I mentioned these ideas that have come out of the University of Bournemouth and other pedagogical studies and such, that suggest that there are committees, there are common patterns which keep occurring again and again and again. So for example, Eton College, arguably the best preparatory school in the world, based in Windsor, not far from where you hail from. If you go there and see what they're doing, what exactly are they doing? If you go there, where they're doing much of their teaching, there aren't smart boards, there aren't those things. It's all kind of Gothic stone-clad buildings and sitting on wooden pews and such. It's a very different way of thinking about and doing it, but for some reason it's the best. So the problem is that when you are locked into a language of improvement, measurement, skills and such, it naturally will train the way that you think about it, right? If all you can think about, the finest cuisine that you can think about is fast food, and when someone comes and shows you something else, well, it's not in your, it's not in your way of thinking about it. I think that's part of it. I think we need to stop thinking about, well, this worked in the 12th century and it can work in the 21st century. We need to think about the human condition as such is the same, and there are patterns. And I think something that which is reflective of this and may enlighten the debate slightly is something very similar happened in the 1970s with Professor Christopher Alexander, who was an urban designer and an architect, and he was interested in the way in which modern architecture is it's a value judgment, but he was arguing that it actually disembodies people from their place, and it often isolates people. And what is it about a place that just makes you feel alive? What are those things? And he wrote this, if anyone's interested, 12-volume work called The Pattern Language, where he sees patterns emerging in classical architecture, modern architecture, again and again and again, which just seem to work. Something similar, I think, needs to be done with education, because I think you're fighting on a double-fronted problem here. Islamic education in a state school is lower down the rung in the hierarchy of knowledge in any case. It's not up there with the queen of the sciences, whether it's science or engineering or the applied sciences. So you're already a minority within a minority within a minority. So that, I think, needs to be put in its proper place. We're not competing with algebra. We're not competing with students trying to get their SAT scores. So I think that's part of it, because the way in which Islamic education is kind of finds breath within public schooling in the Muslim world as such, it's fairly similar in the West. I mean, it's kind of put quite down the rung, and so it's not competing at the same level. And like Dr. Mehman said, the teachers are devalued because of that as well. So it's not a fair fight. But I think just in terms of your question, it's an important way to kind of rethink the way that we frame these ideas. And if we are going to take, as I was mentioning, things from the past, there is a kind of a tahdeeb in itself in which way we can do that.
Okay, thank you. So all three of you, you spoke very convincingly about the idea of the teaching of Islamic studies being the area that we really need to focus on, and perhaps even suggesting that maybe we're paying too much attention to curriculums at the, whilst neglecting the pedagogy of Islamic studies. So, Nadeem, what would you say? And then I think you finished on this point to some degree. What would you say are the key priorities to improving the quality of teaching and learning in Islamic studies, well, particularly here in the UAE, and then beyond?
I think it's a good question. I think a lot of it starts with having these sorts of conversations. I think for teachers, there aren't enough forums or opportunities to debate, question, and explore different ways of teaching. So a lot of times you have problems, but as we all know, the life of a teacher is actually pretty intense, with the number of teachers, number of classes they're teaching, and then you come home and you're marking. They don't actually have a chance to sit and reflect and say, could I have been doing this differently? Are my students really engaged? Like, one of the questions that I think a lot of teachers don't even have an opportunity to ask them is, say, why are those 12 students at the back of my class not paying attention? What could I have been doing differently? I mean, you start to ask yourself, if you had an opportunity to reflect, you start asking yourself, why is it students are not engaged? Or if you're getting feedback from parents, what could I do about it? And it has to be done in a safe space. I think the challenge is that it's not being done in a safe space. What I mean by that is there's so much pressure on Islamic studies teachers to improve that a lot of times what I see when I do workshops is they say, we already know this, don't worry, we got it, and it's a knee-jerk reaction, because there's this sense of saying, if we have this conversation, it's like saying that we need more support. And again, it's this fine line between creating opportunities, but then creating them within a safe space where teachers feel like we can do professional development just like all other educators would, but do it in a way where we can ask the right questions and have the right discussions.
So what you're referring to is not necessarily the improving their understanding of the content. You're talking about the delivery of the content and using methods and methodologies that to improve that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm speaking about the actual methodology of imparting.
Yeah.
I think by virtue of having that conversation, you improve the quality of your teaching. It's like a science teacher talking about science teaching all day, and suddenly you start looking at your science curriculum more closely because you weren't doing it before. But I mean, we do this in every other subject. You have IB schools having mandated professional development regularly. British schools to maintain their Ofsted inspections. You're doing professional development, but we don't have that opportunity for Islamic studies teachers, right? So they end up attending workshops on other things, but they're not having their own conversations, and across schools. And it's really sad, but I mean, working in the field, I've seen tons and tons of Islamic studies teachers that the response when they get negative criticism or when they feel there's too much pressure is to just jump to another school. But that's not solving the problem. It's the problem is we're not giving the support to teachers. So